Welcome to The Buff Show. Matt Buff, your host, with you on the American Adversaries Radio Network, where you can catch the shows on 94.9 FM, AM 950 if you're here in Central Florida, or of course, and that's live at 5 p.m. Eastern, Sunday through Friday, but now The Buff Show will be joining the American Adversaries Radio Network.
Hot diggity dog.
On Saturdays at 3 p.m. Eastern time, so you get American Adversary stuff all week long now. Christopher Hart is the host, political mad scientist and philosopher. Great to see you, Christopher Hart.
Great to have you as part of the team. You've always been part of the team, well, for the past couple of years since we first met at a remote broadcast.
A very rainy night at Tijuana Flats.
But it was a fun night, and it was great meeting you and your lovely wife and children. And great to have you as part of the our radio network. And great to see you debuting your very own show live on Saturdays. And it's going to be a lot of fun for you, I'm sure. And I know you're going to be a big success.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. We have a huge lineup of guests for you. You're just going to love what we have. If you're easily offended, you're probably not going to be a huge fan. But if you're not easily offended, you're going to love the show. We're going to go the Buff Bros, like the Bernie Bros.
Right.
But I don't know how. We'll figure all that stuff out. But
now that's live at 3 p.m. Saturdays on AM 950 and FM 94.9, The Answer in Orlando. And you'll be able to see it on our Facebook page, American Adversaries on Facebook Live, too.
Yes, indeed. So it's just going to be hard to miss it.
Tune in, ladies and gentlemen. You'll love it, I'm sure.
It's going to be a great time, just like this show's a great time. And, of course, today, when we do these shows together, when the American Adversaries and the Buff Show collide, it's at the Patrick Magaro and Jamie Housecott Studios of Housecott Magaro Law Firm, Appeals Law Group. Visit appealslawgroup.com. Thanks for hosting us, fellas. We really appreciate it. So last night on the Joe Biden, I just love it when he goes live. I love it.
Joe Biden comedy tour.
It is. It's the...
You remember you had the Blue Comedy tour? Yeah. Now you got the Come On Man comedy tour.
Come on, man. You know the thing. But he comes out. Now, Pierce Outlaw, big fan of Pierce Outlaw. He joins you on Friday nights on the American Adversaries Radio
Patriot
Show.
Home Funding Friday.
Yeah, that's right. He always talks about the dregs of society, and that's a Joe Biden quote, and the basket of deplorables. He always makes sure to remind you of that. Biden just said, you know what? Forget it. You're just awful people.
He said 15% of us.
15%
or was that
of you.
50%?
It was 10 to 15%, and I think he was undershooting it because the guy he was talking to was nodding.
According to them, anyway.
Yeah, according to them. Well, that rounds out to about 50 million people in America. How many voted for Trump?
About 60 million.
So he's falling short because he knows he's not talking to the protesters in the street when he said they're not good people. He's not talking about the protesters. Who do you think he's talking about, Chris?
He's talking about the Trump supporters. He's talking about
Absolutely.
You and I. And we've talked about this on the show for years on the radio show, and we've been talking about this now on several occasions on these podcasts.
Yes, indeed.
And that is, for one, politics is very emotional. For two, it's like professional wrestling. In that, I mean, it works on this dynamic of good versus evil. Everything in politics and everything in pro wrestling works on that dynamic. Okay? Because it's very basic and fundamental to the human experience and very emotional. And then three, we've also been talking about how they vilify as part of this process. And vilifying Trump, obviously, they do that every day. And this is part of the process of vilifying his supporters, which we've talked about as well. Now, these are the same people, ladies and gentlemen, that say Republicans and the president aren't doing enough to unify society. So tell me how saying 10 to 15% of the American public are bad people brings us together.
Yeah, how is that a unifying message?
Right.
Because right before he said that, he said this is the most divisive president. And we have 10 to 15% of people that are just not good people. Well, that's not a unifying message. When you're talking about 50 million people that are not good people, it's a hypocritical thing, and we can talk about hypocrisy all day. But when they talk about divisive, they make it blatantly clear they do not have a soft spot in their heart for conservatives, Republicans, and people that disagree with them.
No,
so that is not a unifying message.
No, in fact, their message is you're not a good person if you don't hate people that they don't approve of.
That's a lot.
But because, once again, it's the process of vilification. Mm-hmm. How can you deal with, love, like anybody that you are making into a villain simultaneously?
Yes.
right? It's pretty hard to do. So they're vilifying and trying to polarize society even more. I mean, it's a common tactic in politics. As I said, it's all good versus evil, and the idea is to portray your opponent as the bad guy, the evil person, the one with the bad ideas, and you're the person that's a good person, angelic and all of this stuff. And so we're seeing this play out in that. But I would say this, that Joe Biden, in his own goofy sort of way, understands that he has a base that is really not motivated right now. And the Democrats understand this too. And so the worse it looks for them politically, the more desperate they become, and their tactics become more dramatic, which is what I think we're seeing happen here right now. Let me mention something that we've talked about on the show for about a week or so now, and that is a book called Generations, like human generations. The book is titled Generations. It was published in 1991. The authors are, William Strauss and Neil Howe. And William Strauss has since died, but Neil Howe is still alive. Actually, he does his own podcasts. You can probably find it, where you find podcasts, right? And in the book Generations, they predicted, now this came out in 1991. They predicted what they called the crises of 2020. Now, okay? And they didn't know what the crises would be, but they knew that it would be a seminal moment in American history, and they based this on this notion of generational change, hence the title of the book, Generations, generational change that occurs about every 80 years. And they went back and saw a pattern in American history where you had these hugely significant moments at 80-year intervals. You had in the late 1700s, in particular 1781, you had the ratification of the Constitution and the defeat of Cornwallis and basically the end of the Revolutionary War and the final true establishment of the United States of America as a sovereign nation state.
And that's to them when the 80-year starts.
Where they begin to describe modern history, yes.
Okay.
Now, this is a trend that they say you can find basically in any culture, okay? And so 80 years later, what did we have from 1781? It was 1861, the election of the first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, and the Civil War began and eventually ended slavery. And then in 1941, you had the inauguration of the first third-term president and the beginning of World War II for the United States. And then 80 years later, they predicted, okay, well, in 2020, something big's going to happen. And sure enough, they was right. So I tell you what, let's bring this up. I want to follow through and describe how they also saw what would come of the crisis. They didn't know what the crisis would be, but they kind of predict what would come of it. So let's pick that up when we come back.
So stay tuned for part 2 where we tell you what the something big was.
Or is.
Or
will be.
Few things. Maybe it hasn't happened yet.
Well, that's just it. I believe that this is leading up to the election on November the 3rd. We are facing a huge crossroads in America. And we'll talk about that when we come back.
Absolutely. So check out part 2 of this weekend's podcast coming up for you. Visit appealslawgroup.com for your appellate law needs, and of course AmericanAdversaries.com for show information. Chris, we'll be right back with all of you guys. Stay tuned and stay smart out there.